First of all, on behalf of the National Park Service, let me welcome you to Gettysburg National Military Park and our midwinter talks. My name's Ranger Carlton Smith, and as the title says, today we're going to be talking about the controversy between James Longstreet and Benjamin Huger at the Battle of Seven Pines. Now, I should also probably point out, as one of my guide friends keeps telling me, that we should probably pronounce Huger's name as Huget, because it's a French Huguenot family. But I also know there's no accent marks in the last name. So to keep it simple, I'm going to Americanize it and just keep it as Huger as we go along here. But first of all, to set that whole thing up, the beginning of 1862, things are not looking good for the South as a whole. Fort Henry on the Tennessee River falls to General Grant on February 6th. 10 days later, Grant recaptured Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. And Federals will occupy the capital of Nashville by February 25th. So all of western Tennessee now is overrun. That forces Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston to fall back to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about midway down the state on the eastern side. Also by February 8th, Roanoke Island, North Carolina is going to be taken by a Union general named Ambrose Burnside. And he will soon be in position to take Norfolk, Virginia from the rear. While all that's going on, General Joseph Johnston is moving his Confederate Army of the Potomac from the Manassas line to Fredericksburg, Virginia, and the Rappahannock line by March 9th. On March 14th, Johnston's army is redesignated the Army of Northern Virginia. Coming into the scene with Johnston's army is Gustavus Woodson Smith. Now, Smith is born in 1821 in Kentucky, graduates from West Point in the class of 1842. Among his classmates is another Confederate general, James Longstreet. Smith graduates a little higher than Longstreet and goes into the engineers. He receives 3 brevets for action in Mexico. He served as an instructor at West Point and then resigned in 1854, becoming the street commissioner for New York City. His resignation is officially accepted on September 20th, 1861. And I say officially because the day before, on September 19th, Gustavus Smith is made a major general in the Confederate Army, where he outranks every other major general except Earl Van Dorn and David Twiggs. That also means he's second in command of the Army to Joe Johnston, despite the fact that he has not fought at First Manassas and has never commanded troops in combat whatsoever. But he's one of those people who, for some reason, some people had a high opinion of, including Joe Johnston. In fact, Johnston wrote to Jefferson Davis on August 19th about people coming into the Army and what rank they should have. And Johnston said, in this connection, let me recommend as 2 of the best officers whose services we can command, G.W. Smith and Mansfield Lovell. They are as fit to command divisions as any men in our service. Smith is a man of high ability, fit to command in chief. Now, not everybody had a high opinion of Smith's abilities, and one of them apparently was James Longstreet. Longstreet's going to write, when I returned to my home to take part in the cause of my people, I sacrificed everything except, as I thought, the hope of a proper recognition of my services. the placing of persons above me, whom I have always ranked, and who have just joined this service, I regard as great injustice. I therefore request that an officer be detailed to relieve me of this command. And what Longstreet's talking about is he's in command of the forward forces from Manassas. So Longstreet's forces are near Fairfax Courthouse on Munson's Hill, where they have a view of the U.S. Capitol. So Longstreet's not being asked to resign. He's asked to be relieved of that forward duty. Now, he's somewhat mollified by the fact that within the next month, October 7th, he himself is promoted to Major General. But also on March 9th, 1862, is going to be fought the Battle of the Monitor and the Virginia. The Monitor is going to win. And that victory will help pave the way for Union Major General George McClellan, to begin moving his Army of the Potomac to the peninsula on March 17th. By March 27th, Johnson is ordered to reinforce the Confederate forces on the peninsula. Also on March 23rd, Major General Thomas J. Jackson will fight a battle at Kernstown, Virginia, just outside of Winchester, which some historians will mark as the beginning of Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign. The siege of Yorktown on the peninsula, right here, will begin on April 5th. Johnson's going to evacuate Yorktown by May 3rd. In between that time, on April 6th and 7th, is fought the Battle of Shiloh in western Tennessee. Also on April 25th, the city of New Orleans, the largest city in the South, will fall to Flag Officer David Farragut. And retreating back from Yorktown is not easy. Apparently there's been a lot of rains before they even start. And Longstreet wrote to Smith on May 3rd, if your road can beat this for mud, I don't want to see it. My men have their bellies full, also their cartridge boxes. So I don't fear McClellan or anyone in Yankeedom. If you see the general, meaning General Johnston, say to him that we are as happy as larks over here till we get 126 wagons, the total number, up to the hub at one time. So they're happy so long as all 126 wagons don't get stuck in the mud. At Williamsburg, on May 5th, is going to be fought a rearguard action directed by James Longstreet. Johnston noted in his official report, about sunrise, the rear guard was again attacked. The action gradually increased in magnitude until about 3 o'clock, when General Longstreet, commanding the rear, requested that a part of Major General D.H. Hill's troops might be sent to his aid. Upon this, I rode upon the field, but found myself compelled to be a mere spectator, for General Longstreet's clear head and brave heart left me no apology for interference. Now, Longstreet himself was born in 1821 in South Carolina, grew up in Georgia and Alabama, graduated from West Point in 1842. He received 2 brevets for gallantry in the Mexican War and served in every major engagement of the war except for Buena Vista. He left the line, became a paymaster with the rank of major on July 19, 1859. He resigned his commission effective June 1st, 1861, and was made a brigadier general on June 17, 1861, and a major general on October 7, 1861. Along with the evacuation of Yorktown, Johnston also orders the evacuation of the Norfolk Navy Yard, and that begins on May 9th. The commander of the Norfolk Navy Yard is Major General Benjamin Huger. Now, Huger was born in South Carolina in 1805, and he graduated from West Point in 1825. He commands several U.S. arsenals, serves on the Ordnance Board, and was Chief of Ordnance for the Army under Winfield Scott in Mexico, where he received 3 brevets of Major, Lieutenant Colonel, and Colonel. He was finally promoted to the full rank of Major on February 15, 1855. He resigned after Fort Sumter, was made a Brigadier General on June 17, 1861, the same day as James Longstreet, and Major General on October 7, 1861, the same date as Longstreet. While in command of Norfolk, he believed the defenses were too weak to withstand an attack, so he started to dismantle the fortifications, set fire to the Navy Yard, and evacuated on May 9th. He'll reach Petersburg with his troops by May 15th. And he's leaving Norfolk with 3 brigades, about 9,000 men altogether. Also, prior to Norfolk, had been fought the battle, as I mentioned, of Roanoke Island on February 8th. Now, that's important because the overall commander of Norfolk is Benjamin Huger. The commander on the scene is General Henry Wise, but Huger is Wise's immediate commander. And a rebel war clerk wrote in his diary on January 13, 1862, the department leaves General Henry A. Wise to his superior officer, General Huger at Norfolk, who has 15,000 men. But I understand that Huger says that Wise has ample means of defense, has ample means for the defense of the island, and refused to let him have more men. The war clerk also noted on April 12th, the committee congressional, which had been investigating the Roanoke Island disaster, have come to the conclusion unanimously, and the House has voted accordingly, and with unanimity, that the blame and guilt for that great calamity rests solely upon General Huger and Judah P. Benjamin, who at the time was Secretary of War. So they're blaming Huger for the loss of Roanoke Island. There was also a public perception that Huger's the one who evacuated Norfolk. And even if he did receive orders from Johnston, he somehow botched the evacuation. It wasn't as complete as it should have been. So in one sense, Huger now has 2 strikes against him. On May 15th, the Union Navy will launch an attack against Confederate forces at Drury's Bluff. And here we see the Union Navy led by the USS Monitor. Here's Drury's Bluff. Here's obstructions. And up the James River is Richmond. So you now raise the possibility of a joint operation on the James River. Johnston is going to continue his retreat up the peninsula towards Richmond. By May 15th, he's about 7 miles from the outskirts of the city. By May 17th, he's within 3 miles of the city. So Johnston continues to evacuate up the peninsula closer and closer to Richmond. Now, why is he doing that? Well, one reason you see the peninsula starts to widen out. So he's got a lot more room to maneuver. And right in here, this blue ribbon is the Chickahominy River. And you can see as the Union troops are moving up to follow Johnston, the river can play a part in this action, in that it can split the Union Army in 2. The Chickahominy itself is normally 40 to 60 feet wide and 2 to 3 feet deep. So it's not a major obstacle in normal weather. But if you just had a thunderstorm or something like that, that river, as we know even from around here, can get pretty treacherous. So what exactly is Joe Johnston's strategy here? Well, he doesn't spell it out in any orders or anything like that. But Douglas Southard Freeman, a Maine Civil War historian, thought this is what Johnston was doing. He said Johnston wanted to concentrate close to Richmond in rear of his retreating army all the forces that could be gathered from other parts of the Confederacy. Give these forces unified command and ample competent leadership. Regard no position in front of Richmond as fixed in the sense that it had to be defended to the last at any cost. Retreat and maneuver as necessity and the movements of the enemy demanded when opportunity offered itself at the proper stage of concentration, strike. Now, also complicating this whole thing is Union Major General Irvin McDowell, who is sitting at Fredericksburg, Virginia, with 35,000 men. And on May 17th, McDowell is ordered to march to Richmond, about 50 miles away, and link up with George McClellan's force of 100,000 men. On May 24th, though, McDowell's ordered to send 20,000 men towards the Shenandoah Valley in response to Jackson's move down the valley. The Valley Campaign now commences in full swing on May 8th with the Battle at McDowell. On May 23rd is fought the Battle of Front Royal. And May 25th, Jackson recaptures the city of Winchester. On May 27th, plans are now made for Smith, the ranking division commander, to attack with 3 divisions the Federal position north of the Chickahominy to prevent the junction of the two Macs, McClellan and McDowell. By the evening of May 28th, the preparations are complete. And Smith wrote on May 28th, by direction of General Johnston, I assumed command of the left wing of the Army, and on the same day placed my own division temporarily under the command of the senior Brigadier General W.H.C. Whiting. That night, though, Brigadier General Jeb Stuart is going to report that McDowell has stopped his forward movement and seems to be turning around and returning to Fredericksburg. So on May 29th, the attack is called off. Smith now proposes to attack the Union Army south of the Chickahominy. Longstreet, though, is still in favor of the original plan, which Joe Johnston is going to overrule. Longstreet then suggests an attack in the area of Seven Pines for the next morning, May 30th, which Johnston also overrules. But also on this date, riding out, expecting to see a battle, is President Jefferson Davis. And Davis wrote, riding onto the main road, which led to the Mechanicsville Bridge, I found General Longstreet walking to and fro in an impatient, it might be said fretful manner. Before speaking to him, he said his division had been under arms all day, waiting for orders to advance, and that the day was now so far spent that he did not know what was the matter. Johnston, though, on May 29th, is going to write to General W.H.C. Whiting, the temporary commander of Smith's division. And Johnston writes, who knows but that in the course of the morning, Longstreet's scheme may accomplish itself. If we get into a fight here, you'll have to hurry to help us. I think it will be best for A.P. Hill's troops to watch the bridges and for yours to be well in this direction, ready to act anywhere. Tell G.W. So in other words, the second in command of the Army is not going to receive direct orders from Joe Johnston. Instead, Johnston wants Whiting to tell Smith what's going on. So there's no direct communication at that point between Joe Johnston and his second in command. On May 30th, Major General D.H. Hill will conduct a reconnaissance in force along the Williamsburg Road and discover the enemy posted west of Seven Pines. But he can't find the Federal left flank, which is either refused or rests on boggy ground between the Williamsburg Road and the Charles City Road. In a long conference, though, between Joe Johnston and James Longstreet, Johnston works out the details for an attack on May 31st. Longstreet is to take command on the right with his own division of almost 14,000 men, Hill's 11,000-man division, and Huger's 9,000-man division. Hill and Huger are given written orders. Longstreet's orders are going to be verbal. And it's going to be reported that agreeable to verbal instruction from the commanding general, the division of Major General D.H. Hill was on the morning of May 31st Artemo, formed at an early hour on the Williamsburg Road as the column of attack upon the enemy's front on that road. Now, what about the orders to Huger? Remember, these are written orders. The first set goes to Huger on May 30th and is timed at 8:40. And this is how they read. The reports of Major General D.H. Hill give me the impression that the enemy is in considerable strength in his front. It seems to me necessary that we should increase our force also. For that object, I wish to concentrate the troops of your division on the Charles City Road and concentrate the troops of Major General Hill on that to Williamsburg. To do this, it will be necessary for you to move as early in the morning as possible to relieve the brigade, Robert Rhodes' brigade, of General Hill's division, now on the Charles City Road. Be ready, if an action should be begun on your left, to fall upon the enemy's left flank. Huger gets another set of written orders sometime in the morning of May 31st. And these were state, I fear that in my note of last evening, of which there is no copy, I was too positive on the subject of your attacking the enemy's left flank. As our main force would be on your left, it would be necessary for your progress to the front to conform at first to that of General Hill. If you find no strong body in your front, it will be well to aid General Hill, but then a strong reserve should be retained to cover our right. Notice in neither of these sets of orders is Huger informed of the entire battle plan or his specific role in it. He's not told, for example, that the whole thing's going to start when your brigade relieves Rhodes' brigade. That's what's going to start the dominoes forward in a sense. He's also not informed that Longstreet's going to be in command of all those forces on the right wing. Now, the orders to Smith don't go out until 12:30 o'clock on the morning of May 31st. As Smith writes at my headquarters on the Brook Turnpike, I received a note from General Johnston directing that my division should take position as soon as practicable upon the 9-mile road near the New Bridge Fork to support, if necessary, the divisions upon the right in an attack upon the enemy, which was to be made early in the morning. At 3 a.m. of May 31st, Huger, through his aide-de-camp, is sending a message to D.H. Hill. And the message reads, a brigade will start for the Charles City Road as soon as possible. And when they are in motion, he will notify you. And we'll be glad if you would send a guide to conduct them. Brigadier General L.A. Armistead will report to General Rhodes. I fear a delay may occur owing to the state of the roads. Now, one of the things in my research of this, I've never really read what anybody said, how far is Huger, first of all, from Gillies Creek, which he has to cross, and how far is he from replacing Rhodes' division or Rhodes' brigade on the Charles City Road? Nobody ever really talks about that. Huger is, I'm a slide behind, excuse me. Here we go. Huger is supposed to start from near Oakwood Cemetery, northeast suburbs of Richmond. And I actually have to thank my fellow ranger, Bobby Crick in Richmond, for giving me some of this information. And according to him, Oakwood Cemetery is about a half mile from Gillies Creek. And depending on how you place Rhodes' brigade on the Charles City Road, Huger has about a 4 to 5 mile march to get there. Okay? Which means it should take Huger between 2.5 and 3 hours, given the conditions of the road, to replace Rhodes' brigade. Now let's give him an hour to prepare. So at 3 a.m. he's getting ready. Everybody's ready to march by 4. That means he should be reaching Rhodes' position about 7 o'clock in the morning. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Rhodes has not been relieved. And in fact, he's not going to be relieved till almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I've never seen anybody raise the issue why it's taking Huger so long to make this 5 mile march. Nobody ever really goes into details about that. What they're going after is the Union Army Fourth Corps, which has crossed the Chickahominy and has fortified Seven Pines. General D.H. Hill wrote, "These facts I communicated to General Johnston about noon on Friday, May 30th. I received a prompt answer from him, saying that satisfied by my report of the presence of the enemy in my immediate front, he had resolved to attack him, and directed me to serve with Major General Longstreet and under his orders. I was directed by General Longstreet to move my whole division at dawn on the Williamsburg Road and to lead the attack on the Yankees. I was, however, directed not to move until relieved by Huger's division." Now, there was a rainstorm on the night of May 30th, and that's going to make the roads muddy, so it could slow down the Confederate advance, but hopefully it's going to flood the Chickahominy and prevent Union reinforcements from coming from the north of the river to reinforce the Fourth Corps on the south side. Again, what they're hoping to do is overwhelm the Fourth Corps under Major General Erasmus Keyes, about 17,000 men, who are posted in and around Seven Pines, along the Williamsburg Road. Heinzman's corps, about 17,000 men, is roughly 5 miles in rear of Keyes. Sumner's corps, another 17,000, are only 4 miles away, but on the other side of the Chickahominy. And on the morning of May 31st, Keyes wrote to General McClellan, "Everything on the part of the Confederates indicates an attack on my position, which is only tolerably strong, and my forces are too weak to defend it properly. Brigadier General Sumner told me yesterday he should probably cross the Chickahominy last night. If he did so and takes post nigh O Tavern and this side, I should feel more secure than I do now." Silas Casey is commanding the division. One of Keyes' divisions about a half-mile west of Seven Pines, with a redoubt helping guard the line. That's the first line of defense. Dias M. Couch is commanding Keyes' other division at Seven Pines itself with an abattis in front of it. That's the second line, both along the Williamsburg Road. The third line is about 2 miles in rear of Casey, and at this point is unoccupied. And this is a map showing the basic routes we've been talking about. Here's the 9-mile road to the north. At this location, it branches off to a place called New Bridge in the Chickahominy. The main road continues south past Fair Oak Station toward Seven Pines. Here's the Williamsburg Road coming out of the city directly toward Seven Pines. And down here is the Charles City Road. And someplace down in here was supposed to be Rhodes Brigade. Okay? This next one kind of shows the general disposition of the forces right before the battle. And most of McClellan's army is north of the Chickahominy River. That's the black line right through the middle of the map. Smith's division is to make sure that no reinforcements come across the river to Keyes' support, and also support the Hill Longstreet attack. In Johnson's official report, he's going to state, General Hill, supported by the division of General Longstreet, who had the direction of operations on the right, was to advance by the Williamsburg Road to attack the enemy in front. General Huger, with his division, was to move down the Charles City Road in order to attack in flank the troops who might be engaged with Hill and Longstreet, unless he found in his front force enough to occupy his division. General Smith was to march to the junction of the New Bridge Road and 9 Mile Road to be in readiness either to fall on Keyes' right flank or to cover Longstreet's left. They were to move at daybreak. Now, later on, in an article for Battles and Leaders in 1884, Johnson wrote that Longstreet and Huger were directed to conduct their divisions to D.H. Hill's position on the Williamsburg Road, and G.W. Smith to march with his to the junction of the 9 Mile Road with the New Bridge Road, where Magruder was with 4 brigades. Longstreet, as ranking officer of the troops on the Williamsburg Road, was instructed verbally to form D.H. Hill's division as first line, his own as second, across the road at right angles, and to advance in that order to attack the enemy, while Huger's division should march by the right flank along the Charles City Road to fall upon the enemy's flank when our troops were engaged with him in front. Longstreet's command of the right was to end when the troops approached Seven Pines, and I should be present to direct the movement. So Longstreet would be in command of the initial attack, but once the troops get to the area of Seven Pines, George Johnson expected to be there himself, and then he'll take command of the forces at that point. And Longstreet would go back to this division command. Smith is going to write that on arriving at the headquarters of General Johnson about sunrise, I learned from him that his intention was that General Longstreet's division should move by the 9 Mile Road, and that of General Hill by the Williamsburg Stage Road, and General Huger's by the Charles City Road. So according to Smith, on the morning all this is happening, that's when Johnson's finally telling him the details of the attack. That he's to move the Longstreet's on the 9 Mile Road, Hill on the Williamsburg Road, Huger on the Charles City Road, and Smith coming in to support Longstreet's attack on the left if necessary. General Whiting, remember in command of Smith's division, is ready to move down the 9-mile road by 6 o'clock in the morning of May 31st. But he's blocked on his advance by Longstreet's division. Some of it are still on the 9-mile road. So Lieutenant Robert Beckham of Smith's staff is sent to find Longstreet. And he finally finds him. Not on the 9-mile road, but on the Williamsburg Road, and opposite the point where the Charles City Road intersects it. It's at the one point where congestion is going to be most likely to occur. And there is congestion now at that point. Longstreet had moved from the 9-mile road to the Williamsburg Road and had to cross Gillies Creek. Because of the evening storm, the creek was raging. And Longstreet decided to bridge the creek. And the way he did that was put a wagon in the middle of the creek and then lay planks from that to the shore. But that only allowed his division to cross in single file. So it's going to take a while to get him across. Meanwhile, Huger's division finally shows up at Gillies Creek. And nobody at the crossing is aware that Huger is to replace one brigade of Hill's division to start this whole thing going forward. And so as a result, Longstreet's men who are already there insist on crossing first, and Huger's men have to wait. There's no evidence that either Longstreet or Huger were at the bridge itself when this occurred. Huger's going to report there was a delay owing to the sudden rise of the stream on which the troops were camped. Huger also reportedly was delayed in leaving his camp by a sudden freshet or flash flood in Gillies Creek, which at daylight was a raging torrent. Longstreet's division reached Huger's camp between 7 and 8 a.m. Now remember, according to my time frame at 7 a.m., Huger should be relieving roads. Longstreet's getting to the camp, and Huger apparently is still behind him. So again, you have to wonder what's it taking Huger so long to leave his camps. According to Captain Benjamin Sloan on Huger's staff, Longstreet's brigades, as they successfully reached the plain above the creek, halted and remained for an hour or two resting on their arms. This plain was perhaps between 3 and 4 miles in rear of the battlefield. Here at a farmhouse, Huger met Longstreet and Hill, and a discussion was had as to the movements of the divisions and as to the relative rank of the division commanders. Longstreet claimed, by instructions of General Johnston, to be in command of that portion of the army. After protest, Huger acquiesced. It was also claimed that Longstreet's men were arrested while Huger passed them to get in position to finally relieve Hill. Longstreet himself was across the creek by 9 a.m. Smith is going to write that Johnston's intentions, as then explained to me, again on the morning of May 31st, were that whilst General D.H. Hill was attacking the enemy's advanced position on the Williamsburg Stage Road in front, General Huger's division from the Charles City Road would attack the left flank, and General Longstreet's division would engage the enemy on Hill's left. Now coming back to report is Captain Beckham. And he now reports he had found Longstreet's division on the Williamsburg Road halted for the purpose of allowing General D.H. Hill's troops to file by. And soon after Beckham returned with information that General Hill's troops had passed and that General Longstreet was making all his dispositions to attack the enemy in conjunction with General Hill's division. as far as all this confusion goes, remember, as far as Smith said he was told, Longstreet's supposed to be on the 9 Mile Road, not the Williamsburg Road. That's strictly for Hill. So Smith reported that he had a conversation with Johnston about this. And according to Smith, Johnston wrote Smith a letter about this. And he said, I received information of Longstreet's misunderstanding, which may be my fault, as I told you at the time, while his troops were moving to the Williamsburg Road. Smith also wrote after General Johnston had been informed that Longstreet's division had crossed over to the Williamsburg Road, he still had faith in the ability of the 20,000 men under Longstreet to crush the enemy in the vicinity of Seven Pines. Now, Johnston eventually hears gunfire coming from the south. A messenger is sent to Longstreet, who returns with a report that Longstreet is involved in heavy fighting and gaining ground. Longstreet sent a message at 3 p.m., but nobody kept a record of the note at that time. So in 1883, Johnston wrote to Longstreet if he remembered this note. And Longstreet wrote back and said, as nearly as I can now recall the note of the 31st, it reported our successful advance, the capture of Casey's camp and position, the failure of Huger to cooperate on our right, and stated that in going forward, we encountered also a flanking fire from the enemy in front of G.W. Smith, which was exceedingly annoying, particularly with fresh troops. General Hill reported, I was directed by General Longstreet to move with my whole division at dawn about 4:20 a.m. on the Williamsburg Road and to lead the attack on the Yankees. I was, however, directed not to move until relieved by Huger's division. The relieving force not having reached me at 1 o'clock, the signal guns were fired and my division moved off in fine style. Rhodes' brigade on the right of the road, supported by Raines' brigade, Garland on the left, supported by G.B. Anderson. And Johnson had to admit in his official report that owing to some peculiar condition of the atmosphere, the sound of the musketry did not reach us. I consequently deferred giving the signal for General Smith's advance until about 4 o'clock, at which time Major Jasper Whiting of General Smith's staff, whom I had sent to learn the state of affairs with General Longstreet's column, returned, reporting that I was pressing on with vigor. Has anybody here ever been to the battlefield of Seven Pines? Some of you have. You know that the battlefield of Seven Pines no longer exists. It's now basically the town of Sandstone, Virginia. North of the town is Interstate 64. South of the town is the Richmond International Airport. So the entire battlefield now is covered by this town. Although there are some markers you can follow to try and get a sense of what happened there. And the first one marks McClellan's picket line. This is on West Williamsburg Road, which is Route 60, between Early Avenue and Jackson Avenue. It's about 1,000 yards in front of Case's position. And the picket line actually ran from White Oak Swamp to the Chickahominy River. Now, this view is actually looking east towards the Union lines. The next one is going to read on May 31st, 1862, the right wing of the Confederate forces under Joseph E. Johnston advanced eastward from this point on both sides of the Williamsburg Road to attack the left of McClellan's army, which held Seven Pines and was preparing to besiege Richmond. Now, this one is about 600 feet east from the picket line. And again, we're looking east towards the Union position. The next one reads, the Federal first line, against which the right wave of the Confederate Army directed the main assault on May 31st, crossed the Williamsburg Road near this spot. Casey's readout, the center of the Federal resistance on this line, was 200 yards southward. To get to the next one, you've got to go 1 block south to Casey Street. Or excuse me. Yeah, I got my slides confused. This one is still on the Williamsburg Road. The next one is on Casey Street. And this one states, nearby stood the twin houses, from the vicinity of which Confederate troops moving eastward charged the Federal second line near Seven Pines. After they had stormed Casey's redoubt and the rest of the Federal first line on May 31st. The twin houses they're talking about are these. They were 2 twin farmhouses along the Williamsburg Road. And at the time, they were very good battlefield markers everybody could focus on. This marker was also on Casey Avenue, or Casey Street. And this one reads, in the abattis occupying this ground and covering the 2nd Federal line, the advance of Rhodes' brigade was halted by heavy fire after sunset, May 31st. The Confederate dead in this last charge were never removed. They still slumber hereabout. Now, this one is especially tough because the plaque itself was stolen in the 1970s. The granite base it was on was removed to make way for a housing development. Okay, so that marker doesn't even exist anymore. I also asked Bobby Crick about that last statement about the Confederate dead and having never been removed. And I said, when they were putting this housing development in, were there any reports of bodies being dug up? And he said none that he knew of. And he suspects if there were, this is a case where the developers kind of threw the body parts off to the side and didn't say anything about them. Because the minute you find something like that, all work comes to a stop. So rather than make the work stop, they just kind of pretended nothing was there and went right on with the work. McClellan's second line, this marker is actually at the Seven Pines National Cemetery, which is at the intersection of the East Williamsburg Road and East 9 Mile Road. And if you think the term Seven Pines was just something they used, at this location there really were 7 pines. So that's where the term of the battle comes from. A professor of mine in college one time told the story that a Confederate mother was asked if she was concerned about her son fighting at this place called Seven Pines. And she was pretty convinced if there were 7 pines there, he would be hiding behind one of them. The last plaque here is McClellan's third line of defense. And it says in part, the Confederates taking the first and second lines on this road did not reach the third line. So the Confederates never got to this position. And this is actually on the old Williamsburg Road. It's not Route 60. It's the old Williamsburg Road, so you got to get off a little bit to find this. So there are some markers designating what happened, but forget about trying to follow the course of the battle. It's not going to happen today, unfortunately. Also, at some point on May 31st, Joe Johnston is going to be hit by shell fire and seriously wounded. At that point, Smith is going to assume command. And he'll order a renewal of the action on June 1st, but his nerves started to become shattered. In fact, on June 2nd, it's reported that General Smith finds himself utterly unable to endure the mental excitement incident to his actual presence with the Army. Nothing but duty under fire could possibly keep him up, and there is danger of his entire prostration. He goes to town today to gain a few days' respite. All business and all exciting questions must be kept from him for a while. Since writing the above, I have again seen the general, and am pained to learn the partial paralysis has already commenced. The case is critical and the danger imminent. So it seems that Smith is starting to somewhat crack under the pressure of actual Army command at this point. And basically what's going to happen on June 1st, the Federals reinforced are going to launch a counterattack and recapture all the ground they lost on May 31st. Longstreet, though, is going to state, I have reason to believe that the affair would have been a complete success had the troops upon the right been put in position within 8 hours of the proper time. The want of promptness on that part of the field and the consequent severe struggle in my front so greatly reduced my supply of ammunition that at the late hour of the move on the left, I was unable to make the rush necessary to relieve the attack. Joe Johnston's going to write in his official report, the skill, vigor, and decision with which these operations were conducted by General Longstreet are worthy of the highest praise. He was worthily seconded by Major General Hill, of whose conduct and courage he speaks in the highest terms. Had Major General Huger's division been in position and ready for action when those of Smith, Longstreet, and Hill moved, I am satisfied that Keyes' corps would have been destroyed instead of merely being defeated. Had it gone to action at 4 o'clock, the victory would have been much more complete. Now, of course, Huger is going to dispute these criticisms by Longstreet and Johnston. And he seeks to have either a court-martial or at the least a court of inquiry, try to straighten it out. And when Johnston's asked about a court of inquiry, he wrote, I have no disposition to prefer charges against Major General Huger. The passage in my report of which he complains was written to show that the delay in commencing the action of May 31st was not my fault. Major General Huger's assertions that I shielded myself by endeavoring to make General Longstreet responsible for my statements is utterly unfounded. He certainly knows that I cannot contradict that officer's report unless upon the way of evidence against it. He makes no material contradiction of what I said of his troops. And Longstreet in his military memoirs wrote that upon meeting General Huger in the morning, I gave him a succinct account of General Johnston's plans and wishes. And after he inquired as to the dates of our commissions, which revealed that he was the ranking officer, when I suggested that it was only necessary for him to take command and execute the orders. This he declined. So if Longstreet's statement is correct, he told Huger everything that was going on, what the plans were, and since Huger is senior, you offered to turn over command, and Huger turned it down. Not a good sign for an Army officer to turn down responsibility. So maybe another strike against Huger. And some of this isn't stuff that comes out way after the battle. Rebel War Clerk wrote in his diary on May 31st, the day of the battle, General Huger's division was not at the allotted place of attack at the time fixed upon. His excuse is that there was a stream to cross. And understanding General Longstreet was his senior in command, which is not the fact, however, he permitted his division to have precedence. All the divisions were on the ground in time but Huger's, but still no battle. On June 1st, he wrote, "The battle was renewed today, but not seriously. The failure of General Huger to lead his division into action at the time appointed is alleged as the only reason why the left wing of the enemy was not completely destroyed." The rebel war clerk also noted on June 30th, "Once more, our men are excoriating General Huger. It is alleged that he again failed to obey an order and kept his division away from the position assigned it, which would have prevented the escape of McClellan." Now, this is in reference to action at Fraser's Farm or Glendale on June 30th, when Huger failed to move up and blocked McClellan's retreat route. The war clerk noted, if this be so, who is responsible after his alleged misconduct at the Battle of Seven Pines? Now, Dr. Freeman also stated there might be some other things working in here besides just misunderstanding of orders and things like that. He felt it is possible, although it cannot be stated as a fact, that Johnston and the division commanders from the Manassas line had a camaraderie that made them defend one another and assume a certain sense of superiority to the Army of the Peninsula and to Huger's command from Norfolk. Perhaps it was not solely by chance. After General Johnston came to Yorktown, he entrusted all major operations to his own troops. Johnston's going to write his narrative of military operations in 1874. Although the condition of the ground and little streams had delayed the troops in their movements, those of Smith and Longstreet were in position quite early enough. But the troops from Norfolk, Huger, who had seen garrison service only and were unaccustomed to the incidents of a campaign, were unnecessarily stopped in their march by a swollen rivulet, which unfortunately flowed between them and their destination. Now, as I mentioned, Joe Johnston seriously wounded by May 31st. And taking over for Joe Johnston effective June 1st as temporary commander, remember, temporary commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, is Robert E. Lee. Now, some of Johnston's supporters at the time reportedly told him they thought this was a disaster for the South. But Johnston's response was, "No, sir. The shot that struck me down is the very best that has been fired for the Southern cause yet. For I possess in no degree the confidence of our government. And now they have in my place one who does possess it, and who can accomplish what I never could have done: the concentration of our armies for the defense of the capital of the Confederacy." Now, Lee, of course, is going to inherit the situation between Longstreet and Huger. And actually, on the evening of June 1st, Longstreet detached all of Huger's troops and placed them under D.H. Hill. Huger, with Longstreet's permission, goes to Lee's headquarters. And on June 2nd, Huger is ordered to report back to Longstreet. When Huger doesn't report immediately, Longstreet placed the division under the command of Jeb Stuart. When Huger complained about this action by Longstreet, Longstreet wrote to Lee explaining everything. And he ended by saying that he, Huger, has joined his division this morning and taken command. And that was it. Lee, though, was suggest twice in 2 weeks that Huger be transferred. His slow manner, his adherence to Army routine, his seeming negligence in the face of the enemy, Huger was considered too old army and too old to adjust to new conditions and realities. Huger is finally relieved of command on July 12, 1862, and assigned as inspector of artillery and ordnance, a position he is more than qualified to fill. He later becomes the chief of ordnance, the chief of the Bureau of Ordnance in Kirby Smith's Trans-Mississippi Department. So they're going to send Huger as far away from Richmond as they can get him. Douglas Southard Freeman wrote that he, Huger, had been too long habituated to the slow, peacetime routine of the Ordnance Service to adjust himself to field command, for which he had no aptitude. Although he was no more than 56, he had the look of a man prematurely aged by hardened arteries. So when I first looked at this, I thought Huger had to be at least in his late 60s. He's 56. Longstreet, on the other hand, by October of 1862, becomes the senior lieutenant general in the entire Confederate Army. He's going to help Lee win the Second Manassas and Fredericksburg campaigns. He conducts the Suffolk campaign. He'll fight the First Corps at Gettysburg and Chickamauga. And at Chickamauga, he basically wins the battle there. Saves Lee's army on the second day at the Wilderness, is severely wounded, comes back to duty, and serves with Lee through Appomattox. He dies in 1904, one of the most controversial figures of the old Confederacy. But one of Longstreet's keys to success with his troops is how he treats them. And one of the things he feels that all the troops are entitled to are battle honors, if they've won them properly. And in fact, actually on June 12, 1862, he writes to D.H. Hill, "I send enough of the 7 Pines for your troops, but think that neither of the regiments that left the battlefield have the slightest claim to it, nor the regiment that lost its colors. Properly is not even entitled to colors. We must endeavor to have this thing select, or it be of no service. Any regiment that goes through the battle credibly, I think entitled to the inscription. But I hold that no regiment goes through credibly when it leaves the field before the fight is over, particularly when repeated efforts have to be made to get it back upon the field. I have spoken in strong terms about this because I am entirely satisfied that it is just. In other words, if you prove credible on the battlefield, you can put that battle honor on your flag. But if you leave or lose your flag, you're not entitled to it. So long as we want to make sure those that earned it got it, and those who don't earn it don't get it." One of Longstreet's aides, T.J. Gorey, wrote to his sister on June 17th, this about 2.5 weeks after the battle. And he said, for some inexplicable cause, he, Huger, did not commence to move his troops until 11 or 12 o'clock a.m. and was at least 6 hours behind time. And the consequence was the attack, which was intended to be made at 8 o'clock a.m., was not begun until 2 o'clock p.m., entirely too late for General Huger to attack the enemy's left flank. Colonel E.P. Alexander, writing his military memoir, stated that General Longstreet entirely misconceived his orders, and instead of marching straight down 9 Mile Road, massing in front of G.W. Smith, he crosses over to the Williamsburg Road to get behind D.H. Hill. Of course, he would not have done it had he not considered himself ordered to do it. Now, some modern historians who don't like Longstreet kind of put a different spin on this. And Eckenrode and Conrad wrote their biography on Longstreet in 1934. And if you want to look for a hatchet job on Longstreet, this is a good one to start with. In regard to Seven Pines, Economic Conrad stated, Longstreet, however, with that burning ambition of his, was in no mood to play second fiddle to G.W. Smith. What seems to have happened is that Longstreet sought Johnston sometime in the evening of May 30th and persuaded the commander to let him transfer his own force from the 9-mile road to the Williamsburg Road. Moreover, he induced Johnston to give him the command of the right wing, which the commander probably did on the assumption that Longstreet was next in grade to Smith and consequently the senior major general on that flank. The truth is that the small, nervous Confederate commander, lacking in self-confidence, could not resist Longstreet's magnificent self-assurance and physical largeness. So in other words, to keep Smith from getting any credit for the fighting at Seven Pines, Longstreet's going to completely disrupt Joe Johnston's battle plans, and in fact, you almost get the impression reading this that he somehow overwhelmed Joe Johnston with his largeness. Longstreet's about 6'2" and weighs about 200 pounds. But I've never really heard anybody really mention Joe Johnston as lacking in self-confidence before this. Now, Douglas Southard Freeman, writing in 1942, had a different take on it. He said it scarcely is reasonable to say that he, Longstreet, marched over to the Williamsburg Road to get rid of Johnston at Smith and to fight his own battle in his own way. The probability is that he moved southward through honest mistake in the issuance or interpretation of orders. Staff work at General Headquarters on May 30th, 31st was about as bad as it could have been. For this, Johnston, in large measure, was responsible. Witnesses failed to have a copy made of the instructions he personally wrote for Huger the night before the battle. Longstreet has no culpability in this. If his orders were equivocal, his subsequent confusion was the result of inexperience in the logistics of a far larger command than ever he had handled in the field. A nice biography of Longstreet was done by Colonel B.D. Sanger in 1952. And he didn't really have too much to say about it. He simply wrote, "The heavy rain and wretched conditions of the roads, poor staff work, lack of written orders, misunderstanding of verbal orders, and Longstreet's delay in attacking all acted to create confusion, delay, and lack of coordinated movement. The result was piecemeal attacks, ending in local success, but not in any sustained, coordinated advance all along the line." So I mentioned Johnston wrote his narrative in 1874. In 1959, a new edition was published with an introduction by historian Frankie Van Diver. And Van Diver's conclusion was Seven Pines could not be rated a success. The action began slowly with consequent loss of the element of surprise. Johnston's subordinates were uncertain of who commanded on what part of the field. His fault certainly. And coordination of several large bodies of men appeared beyond the capacity of inexperienced generals and staff officers. Much confusion could have been avoided had Johnston taken the time to issue precise orders and to make certain that they were carefully distributed. Instead, he relied on his friends among the generals to see that everyone knew his plan. Since he did not make clear the chain of command, he ignored the very point which had most confused him in the Battle of Manassas. And there was some indication that in the heat of this essentially well-planned but indecisive action, he lost control of various parts of the battle. So according to Van Diver, the guy to blame for all this is Joe Johnston, not James Longstreet. An interesting paper was written in 1995 by Major Hampton E. Height. This was his thesis paper for the Command and Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. And part of what he wrote of Longstreet was that Longstreet's first attempt at division command was not successful. He demonstrated strength in several leadership competencies, but failed in communication, planning, and ethics. He appeared to favor a strategic offensive, and his tactical actions on the field were aggressive, but at times impulsive and reckless. It was early in the war, and this was Longstreet's first attempt at handling large numbers of troops, so his mistakes, with the exception of ethics, are reasonable. Dr. Freeman, though, did conclude that the inexcusable part of Longstreet's conduct was his successful effort to make Huger the scapegoat. But as we've seen, Huger, in my opinion, was like crossing the creek to begin with. He was already several hours behind when he ran in with Longstreet. Also, even after that, Huger doesn't really do anything to endear himself to anyone in command position with the Army of Northern Virginia. He was too much of a go-by-the-book. He had no talent for field command. And in the end, both Joe Johnston and Robert E. Lee would support Longstreet. So despite Longstreet's supposed failings, Johnston and Lee saw more of a fighting spirit in Longstreet than they did in Huger. Keep in mind, Longstreet would remain with Lee until Appomattox. And he was referred to Lee during the upcoming 7 Days campaign as the staff in my right hand, and more affectionately after Antietam as my old warhorse. I want to thank everybody for joining me this afternoon for the talk. I probably went a little over. What time is it? 2:15. Sorry for going over a little bit. Those of you who want to leave, feel free. Does anybody else have any questions, though, at this point?